Hey guys, police here to take me down to the station. So I'm going to head down with them, have a chat, and see what they've got to say. Apparently telling me that I have been inciting. So
what? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, g'day.
Hey, I'm Josh from the Danny Police Station, mate. We're here today to arrest you for incitement.
Can anybody, by the way, explain to me in simple sentences why the Australian government is any better or any nobler than the Taliban? Both groups believe that they have a right to oppress and a right to imprison people for their own good. Are Western governments any better anymore?
G'day and welcome to episode 73 of The Other Side. We have got a huge show for you today coming up. What did Candace Owens really say about Australia? And was she more right about us than we'd like to admit? Dan Andrews carts off another critic to jail for saying stuff he doesn't like on social media, but that's normal in the new Australia, so whatever. And the brilliant Bella De Brera joins us to teach us about history and how it really does repeat itself. Bella heads up the IPA's Foundations of Western Civilization program, and she says the world's seen all this tyranny before and it doesn't end well. We'll end the show with a nice long podcast-length chat with Bella that you can watch now or catch up on later. And speaking of tyranny, we will also attempt this week to explain Dan Andrews' latest power grab so that all non-Victorian Aussies like me can understand it too, because we really must. Popular American commentator Candace Owens copped it on social media this week for comments that she made on her Daily Wire TV show, Candace, about America invading Australia. Here's how the kids on The Project on Channel 10 saw it.
Now, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but some Americans have been really worried about Australian lockdowns. And one commentator is so concerned, she wants to send US troops to liberate us. Look, I was so touched by the offer that I decided to make this message.
Hi, America. It's been a tough couple of COVID years here in Australia, but we've managed to get through it with the knowledge that you have our backs. But we didn't know just how concerned you were about us until now.
What's actually happening under the guise of this virus is federal overreach, tyranny, totalitarianism, the kind that gives birth to evil dictatorships and human atrocities.
This is Candace Owens, who, as far as I can tell, is a passionate pro-gun Trump supporter who believes white nationalism isn't that big a deal, claims the US election was rigged, and announced she'll never get the COVID vaccine. But her biggest worry? Australia's lockdown laws.
Not allowed to drink or eat while standing up anywhere. Must scan a QR code to go everywhere, literally everywhere, including toilets. No dancing anywhere.
The cool kids of The Project. Sadly, they represent an entire class of elite inner-city Aussies who keep their lives simple and their brains calm by just convincing themselves that if all the other cool kids think something is silly, well then, it must be silly, right? The problem is that everything Candace said there was actually accurate. That is actually what's happening in Australia. The world can't be divided up anymore into the cool progressive kids and the nerdy conservative kids. The cool progressive kids are looking dumber and stupider by the minute, and the project's ratings prove that, thankfully, most of the rest of Australia is catching on to that game. The nerdy conservative kids have been using their brains, and they've noticed some scary stuff that is actually happening. Here's how Candace really presented that story.
My husband has a lot of family members who live in Australia. They're all wonderful people, despite the fact that we do not always agree on politics. They're kind of, the old school type. They don't really let politics get in the way of their meaningful relationships. Well, recently he received a message from one of these family members, and she was expressing how the mental state of everyone around her is in steep decline. She shared with him a message that she had received from a friend of hers, a woman who lives in Queensland, and the message is genuinely shocking. I was shocked reading this message, and I decided that for this episode, I'm just going to read it to you verbatim. So just to get you guys ready, it's a list of the COVID rules that Australian citizens are being made to follow. And as I read this, I actually want you to close your eyes and to imagine that this was your life, and to imagine what your mental state would be like if you were being made to abide by these rules. Ready? First and foremost, there are a limited number of people allowed in your household. And at various times, she writes, we are told we are allowed no visitors. Funerals have to be kept between 5 and 10 people. Must scan a QR code to go everywhere, literally everywhere, including toilets. There are curfews and there are helicopters patrolling the skies to ensure that everyone is abiding by the curfews. You are not allowed to go past 5 kilometers from your home. Just to put that in perspective, that's about 3 miles. A little over 3 miles from your home, you're not allowed to travel past. You're not allowed to sit down at parks, beaches, and public spaces. You're not allowed to drink or eat while standing up anywhere. You must sit down to drink or eat everywhere. No dancing anywhere. Only 1 person per household is allowed to go shopping for essentials. Only essential shopping is allowed. And at times, ready? The defense force and police have checked what people are shopping for. Imagine that. What are you buying today? That's happening. Dog parks, playgrounds, bike parks, beaches are closed and barricaded. Mask wearing is required when outside, and even if you are alone. And at one point in Queensland, it was also required when in your car alone or mowing the front lawn. International borders are closed. No one is allowed to leave the country. Small businesses are shut down while big businesses are allowed to operate. This next one to me is it's insane. It's so crazy. Ready? Citizens are locked out of their home state. Thousands of them are not allowed to return unless they get a vaccine, only after they go through a slow and restrictive exemption request process. Okay, so imagine you live in Tennessee, all right? You happen to be in Connecticut, and they say, you know what? You're not allowed to travel from state to state. You can't go back to your home state of Tennessee unless you get a vaccine. It's actually unimaginable. Not being able to go home because you have to be vaccinated. Not only that, you have to apply once you get the vaccine to be able to go home. This is what is going on right now in Australia. I genuinely do not know what to say to this.
Yeah, tell us about it, because there's nothing you actually can say except that it's outrageous and half of our compatriots here in Australia are asleep. Now, the family friend from Queensland who wrote that letter to Candace has obviously put a whole bunch of things together there that have happened at different times and maybe not all at once. But we need to really understand and reflect on this. Not one of those statements, which sound as ridiculous as they do, is actually not true. It has all actually happened at one point or another over the past 2 years. It's funny when you get an outsider's perspective on how things look, isn't it? When a friend says, come on, mate, this is nuts. A smart person would stop and think about it. But the dickheads at the project, and I'm sorry, I can't hold back and be semi-polite to these guys anymore. These people are just dickheads. They think that the best response to all of this is to make fun of it. They call themselves a news show. News presented differently. News presented moronically might be a better tagline.
The more Candace read about Australia's lockdowns, the more she realised there was only one possible solution.
When do we invade Australia and free an oppressed people who are suffering under a totalitarian regime?
Candace may not always know where the camera is, but she has a point. It's time for America to liberate us. It's time for America to liberate Australia. The rest of us really appreciate how much real estate we occupy in the brains of your deepest thinkers.
There's some crazy going on right now where the army is trying to keep people inside.
People aren't allowed to speak to their neighbors.
So a national manhunt for a man who sneezed in an elevator. That's the state of play in modern-day Australia.
America, it means a lot that you're so distressed by our plight.
Okay, so the camera joke was funny. I'll give her that. But it's funny that a bunch of mostly unfunny comedians pretending to bring you the news would miss the fact that when Candace said she wanted the US to invade Australia to liberate us, she was joking to make a point.
For the last 20 years, the United States has spent trillions of dollars overseas in Afghanistan fighting a war, which we lost, by the way. We were told that the war was necessary anyway. It was necessary. The slaughtering of American sons and daughters on foreign soil because we were fighting a noble cause to spread democracy in a tyrannical land, to free an oppressed people. So I'm going to ask those same lecturing politicians and media members a question now. When do we deploy troops to Australia? When do we invade Australia and free an oppressed people who are suffering under a totalitarian regime? When do we spend trillions of dollars to spread democracy in Australia? Australia currently, make no mistake, is a tyrannical police state. Its citizens are quite literally being imprisoned against their will. So when do we deploy? Of course, I ask that in jest because we all know the real answer.
So Candace is making an argument against America running off and invading foreign countries whenever they see them falling into tyranny. And that's an argument that used to be one the left liked to make. No Team America World Police for the cool kids. Until Trump came along and suggested the same thing. Then it became all confusing for the woke kiddies' little brains. How can I agree with Donald Trump that America should mind its own business? That doesn't compute. Brain explosion. It's okay, Candace. We get what you're saying. Those of us on the political right actually think. And we know a joke when we see it. If only the project did too. For months now, I've been saying that our premiers are out of control. In fact, our entire political class is out of control. And our media and our legal class as well, just for the record. By out of control, I mean that they're all assuming far more power and authority than is their right in a liberal democracy. They're all assuming power and authority that is illiberal and unwelcome to those of us who've led a different kind of life. Working hard, building businesses, taking risks, and actually contributing to the national value creation that they too often sponge off. Australia is supposed to be a free country, a true liberal democracy, mindful and wary of government, keen to keep government as small as possible, not seeking government to be its nanny and protector and continuously keep on growing and growing until there's no one left to create the value needed to pay for any of it. But we can't call ourselves a liberal democracy any longer. We're now an authoritarian pseudo-democracy. I say we're authoritarian because our leaders act not as if they're servants of us, the people, as they should, but as if they're our rulers in the classical sense, as if they've been elected to be King Daniel or Queen Anastasia or Prince Mark and Emperor Scott. Instead of Caretaker Dan, or respectfully light touch Mark, we've got these kings and queens and princes and princesses. Now I say we're a pseudo-democracy because our choice is between dumb and dumber, or to be more accurate, rude and ruder. The choice being between a far left-wing Labor Party that's unrecognisable as the child of the Hawke-Keating Labor Party of the 80s and 90s, full of infantile woke fools drunk on power, ready to spend the nation into bankruptcy for generations, all in the false name of keeping us safe. We've got them on one side and a Liberal Party on the other side that seems to think the American definition of the word liberal, not the classical definition, is their calling. To Americans, a liberal is someone of left-wing persuasion. When Sir Robert Menzies established the Liberal Party in Australia, he meant liberal in the classical sense, what we might now have to call libertarian or classical liberal. That is, people who value individual freedom and free market economics, who believe that only by pursuing our highest ideals and our best lives as individuals can we actually fruitfully contribute to society in a manner that is best for the collective and creates the most value for all of us as a nation. The latest obscenity to come from the premiers was by far the biggest obscenity of all throughout this pandemic crisis. And it's come from the state and government that's consistently carried out the most obscene attack on fundamental Aussie values of freedom. Dan Andrews' Labor government in Victoria. Now look, I know those of us who care about liberty in this country are exhausted. It's been a horrifying 2 years for us. Partly because of COVID, but mostly because of the way our political representatives and our fellow Aussies have reacted to COVID. But folks, we have got to keep on fighting. And most of all, we have to keep educating our complacent friends and relatives about what is going on. This is not a conspiracy theory. We are not right-wing nut jobs. This is the scariest legislation to appear before a parliament in our nation in my living memory. And my journalism career began in the Sir Joh era in Queensland. And the left-wing thinkers in Australia who used to deplore this kind of stuff and actually care about civil liberties are all out to lunch. Now, for those of us outside Victoria, it's hard to understand exactly what's going on down there or over there. So a quick summary. Channel 9's Melbourne Age newspaper is reporting this legislation almost as if it's a normal extension of the state of emergency powers, as are the ABC. News Corp's The Australian newspaper and Sky News are reporting it as the most dangerous legislation to come before an Australian parliament in years. That's a bit confusing for us mere mortals. So I took a look at the summary paper released by the government, and it seems to me that the Age has bought the spin and the Australian is closer to the truth. But you make up your own mind. The summary starts out by framing the new laws as just the permanent pandemic laws that everyone asked for to replace for the state of emergency, which they are. It says, the bill will replace the need for regular extensions to the state of emergency with a tailored, fit-for-purpose pandemic management framework comprising powers appropriate to ensure Victoria is equipped for the ongoing COVID-19 response, as well as future pandemics. The bill establishes several mechanisms designed to improve the transparency of pandemic decision-making and the accountability of the decision-makers to Parliament and the community. Well, that sounds great. It goes on. The bill provides for the use of the same powers currently available under the state of emergency through Chief Health Officer orders. However, the bills provide the Minister for Health with these broad powers to make pandemic orders where reasonably necessary to protect public health, on the advice of the Chief Health Officer. Okay, so that means that the Minister for Health, who is an elected politician, will be the authority instead of the CHO, who's an unelected bureaucrat. Now, I fully support that. That's as it should be. It's as you keep reading that things start to get a bit scarier. The new laws will enable the Premier to declare a pandemic where satisfied that there is a serious risk to public health arising from a pandemic or disease of pandemic potential. Provide for declarations to be renewed for up to 3 months at a time with no outer limit on the total duration of a declaration. Provide the Minister for Health with a broad power to make pandemic orders where reasonably necessary to protect public health. Specify a non-exhaustive list of pandemic management powers that can be exercised by the CHO. Clarify that pandemic orders can differentiate between people in a range of settings according to public health risk, for example, vaccination status. Provide for authorised officers to continue to exercise key functions and powers to support the pandemic response, including continuing the ability to appoint broader classes of authorised officers to support surge capacity. So what does all that mean? Well, the Daily Mail looked into the fine print and reports that it means that the Premier can declare a pandemic for an unlimited time, and rule breakers could be arrested by public servants who've been empowered and jailed for 2 years and fined
Up to $450,000 for a company and more than $100,000 for an individual. It also allows the government to apply lockdowns and vaccine mandates to a class of person, such as the unvaccinated or workers with a certain type of job. Now, some people think that class of person might extend to those who have particular political views. To add to the drama of all of this and the suspicion, the Victorian government ran the law through the lower house of Parliament after giving everyone less than a day to review the thing. They usually get 2 weeks, and then it goes to the upper house for 2 weeks. So it'll now go to the upper house where 3 members who hold the balance of power will pass it because they've been wooed by the government for months on this. The Victorian Liberal Party opposition called it a draconian attack on democracy.
If you've been discussing this with the three amigos in the other place since March, then why are you trying to ram it through in 2 days? This is nonsensical. It's an abuse of power. Disgraceful mistreatment of our democratic traditions, giving dictatorial powers. And you're nodding your head. You think it's great. You think it's terrific, don't you? You think it's absolutely fantastic, giving the dictator the ability to rule by decree. Well, we on this side of the House don't think it's a very good idea.
I asked the member for Q to resume his seat.
A good performance there on the floor of the House from the Liberal Party's Shadow Attorney General, Tim Smith. Too bad that Smith made the blunder of his career just a few days afterwards, deciding to drive home drunk from a dinner party and smashing his car at more than twice over the legal limit.
Writing off his Jaguar buried in the fence of this Hawthorne home, Tim Smith clipped another car, flattened a stop sign, and has all but killed his own political career. Last night, I made a serious error of judgment. After dinner with friends, I believed I was under the legal limit to drive home. This was not the case, and he wasn't even close. Police confirming the 38-year-old MP for Q blew .131, almost 3 times the legal limit.
The calibre of our politicians, ladies and gentlemen. And we're supposed to let these people treat us like children and rule over us. Now more than ever, we need the people to make it damn clear to all our pollies that they serve us. They do not rule us. And they need to pull their heads in big time. Anyway, away from Tim Smith's impeccable timing and back to the real news and the pandemic laws, which is what the media should be focusing on. And a slightly more credible critic this time, the president of Victoria's peak legal body, Christopher Blandon QC, who slammed Dan Andrews' proposed legislation, saying that the Stasi police in former East Germany would have been more happy with the range of powers if they were given it. He says it's the greatest challenge to the rule of law in decades and is an unlimited interference in residents' liberties. Mr. Blandon explained that his main concern is that the bill confers effectively unlimited powers on the health minister to rule by decree for an indefinite period and without effective judicial or even parliamentary oversight. Media commentator Gerard Henderson, meanwhile, said it best in the Australian newspaper on the weekend, writing that, quote, any leader with a modicum of self-awareness might have reflected a bit after the current easing of restrictions, but that's not Andrews' style. On October 22, he, meaning Andrews, tweeted, I'm trying not to sound like some kind of soppy dad here, but I'm proud, bloody proud of this state. It seems that the Premier believes he is the father of Victoria, wrote Henderson. He's not. Only authoritarian leaders make such claims. Moreover, as Gideon High wrote in the Weekend Australian last Saturday, what's Andrews got to be grateful for? High added, we did as we were told to avoid draconian fines for non-compliance. And that's the point. Andrews came to the premiership via Labor's socialist left faction, yet those Victorians who suffered most during the lockdowns were the poor and disadvantaged, especially those with young children living in small apartments. Spot on, Mr. Henderson. And now Andrews wants to fine people $100,000 and lock them up for 2 years. I wouldn't be comfortable handing this kind of power to someone as ethical as Mahatma Gandhi or Nelson Mandela. The last person you want to give that kind of power to is a guy who sends the police around to knock on his critics' doors and arrest them simply because they post stuff on social media criticising him. Which brings me to the disturbing case of Topher Field, the YouTube commentator who was arrested last week for exercising his non-existent right to free speech in Victoria. Watch.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, mate, how are you?
You're okay, so I just want to talk in front of your kids, that's all.
G'day.
Hey, I'm Josh from the Damian Police Station, mate. We're here today to arrest you for incitement. You take it in the police station. I gave you a phone call before because I didn't want to do it in front of your kids, that's all. Out of respect for you and that kind of thing. So we need you to come with us, come to the police station, and then we'll get to come back home eventually.
Okay.
All right?
Yep, let me have a quick word with the wife,
Okay.
and we'll go from there.
All right. Nice one.
All right, well, there you have it. I'm still streaming.
What happened?
Hey guys, police here to take me down to the station. So I'm going to head down with them, have a chat, and see what they've got to say. Apparently telling me that I have been inciting. So
What? That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So we will see what the bail conditions are. That's really what's going to set the tone for what happens from here going forward.
Oh wow, I'm shaking.
If the bail conditions are reasonable, then I might be out today. If they are unreasonable, then I may very well not be. So we'll see. So spread the word. Make sure you comment on this. Make sure you share this. Make sure that everyone knows the police have now come and arrested me. Cheers, guys.
Now, Topher is one of a long line of Australians being carted off to jail and facing criminal records and jail time for what they think and say. That the media hasn't told you much about this is in and of itself extremely worrying. The Journalists' Union in Australia, the MEAA, is an absolute joke these days. We need to bring back the old Australian Journalists Association. The ABC will excuse anything that the government does if it's a Labor government, because Labor are the good guys, remember, and most other media are full of kids who just want to be famous and have been brainwashed by our woke universities. Once upon a time, we defended the free speech rights of people who disagreed with us. That's the whole idea. You don't have free speech in a country if it only applies to people who are saying the things that you want to hear. By definition, that's not how free speech works. Topher allegedly incited people to break Victoria's draconian laws by protesting, as did the pregnant mum that was arrested in front of her kids back in 2020, as did the founder of a major democracy group recently. All of these we've reported on in past episodes. Any so-called journalist not shouting from the rafters about the obscenity of this cannot call themselves a journalist.
Well, joining us now to help us make a little sense out of all of this is Dr. Bella De Brera from the Institute of Public Affairs, the IPA. Bella heads up I've got to get this absolutely right, she's the director of the Foundations of Western Civilizations program at the Institute of Public Affairs. And Bella, thanks very much for joining us on the other side.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you here. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about where we're at right now and how it might parallel with history. Just firstly, your take as an observer and perhaps speaking with your IPA hat on, just your general take on the situation with this pandemic legislation that we're seeing in Victoria. How scary is it? How scared should we really be?
I think we should be very scared. And one of the scary things about this legislation is that not enough people are very scared about it. It really is something that we've never seen in Australia before. We've never seen a politician completely disregard Parliament, completely disregard the entire foundation of our political system. He's completely throwing out the Westminster system out of the window. And it's a very bald-faced power grab under the auspices of emergency powers. He's making his emergency powers permanent. This essentially hands over indefinite, draconian, authoritarian powers to one man. He's not responsible to Parliament. He's not responsible to the voters. And I think we have to fight this, and we have to do everything in our power to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Now, it's a bit strange, isn't it? Because we've got some media more or less playing it down. The Age, the ABC don't seem to be as concerned. It's sort of there's nothing to see here, folks. Just carry on as normal. These are sensible rules to have in place and laws to have in place to help a government manage a pandemic. And then on the other hand, we have people saying, no, hang on, in the detail of this are some quite disturbingly draconian elements. Which we've already discussed on the show. So you're very clear that this is not a situation where we should just be saying, look, this just makes sense. It's good operations management. This is going to help manage the pandemic next time if there is one.
Well, look, it's not surprising that the Age and the ABC have sort of said that this is actually a good thing. They've been championing for the lockdowns for the entire 2 years that we've been going through all this. They've been the ones that have been encouraging Dan Andrews. They're the I Stand With Dan crowd who have supported him for this entire nightmarish journey that he's led Victoria on. I'm in New South Wales now, but I had the misfortune of living through the very long one last year, and I can tell you that it is one of the worst things that I've ever been through, and I can't quite believe that he's put Victorians through this. and he's now doubling down and crushing what is left of Victorian spirit. And the ABC and the media is so responsible. They've encouraged him the whole way, and they are as equally culpable as Andrews in this, because they're enabling this. And of course, there are some that are saying perhaps we should worry about this, but it's the people that you'd expect. It's the QCs. But then again, that it's not all the QCs. There are a lot of that are very silent on this, and the other people have been completely silent. The Human Rights Commission, but where's the Human Rights Commission in all this?
Yeah. Well, I think you put it well in your article that you wrote for the Spectator last month. You paralleled what's happening now to what it was like under Calvinism in, I think it was the 17th century. But you said Australians are currently being subjected to hitherto unprecedented control over and incursions into our lives by the state.
By the state, yes.
We've been subjected to a seemingly inexhaustible and constantly changing supply of confusing, dehumanising and arbitrary edicts, which are daily issued by a cabal of unelected health bureaucrats and their politician handlers. Our police forces have successfully cowed the citizenry into unquestioning obedience. But this is the point that I want to discuss with you. You say even more remarkable has been the willingness of many to become accessories to that political overreach by ratting out friends and families and neighbours and, I guess, turning into dob artists. What are the parallels you see throughout history in terms of the way people are behaving at the moment towards each other, and the way that Victorians seem to have, become a little Stockholm syndrome about all of this? They've accepted this deprivation of liberty to this extreme. That's what shocked me coming back from overseas after 20 years, that Australians have suddenly become so malleable.
Yes, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? The Australians have always talked about how there's this sort of larrikinism and this disregard for authority. It turns out it's completely the opposite. It's so I like the rest of us, I've been trying to work out where does this come from, and as a historian, you always think, well, it must have happened before, and of course, it hasn't. It has. So I looked back at. I knew a little bit about Calvin, and I knew that. I remembered that there was quite a lot of control and authoritarianism. When I looked further into it, I was really struck by the parallels of how he controlled the population through the sort of social discipline, which is what Andrews has done. And he was only able to do it because he had the assistance of the community. It was people who dobbed each other in. He couldn't control. He had a small consistency, sort of consistent street. So there's 25 people, couldn't control the whole population. So he had to enlist the help of Genevans to actually dob on each other.
Right.
And there is so much, I'm not a psychiatrist, but there is so much to unpack. Why are people so willing to dob their neighbors in? Why do they side with the state? Why do they side with an authoritarian figure like Calvin or with Andrews over a neighbor that they might have known for 25 years, or family members? Calvin used children to spy their parents. I'm surprised Andrews hasn't done that yet, but you never know. You never know what's coming.
Well, we've already seen in Queensland, this idea floated that kids who are of a certain age will be considered to be able to make their own decision, irrespective of what their parents think about whether to get vaccinated or not. And so we're starting to see elements of that creeping in, the state overriding parental authority. But can you just tell us, Bella, a little bit about who Calvin was and the era, for those people whose history is as rusty as mine?
Yes, so he was one of the main reformers of the Reformation, and he ended up in Geneva. He had an idea about how he wanted society to be. So he wanted to create a sort of a Protestant Puritan utopia. And he did that by really controlling people's behavior. So he would dictate what you could wear. He would dictate how much you could eat. He would fine you if you were late for sermons. He gave sermons every day for days and days and days until he actually sort of wore himself out. And it was a sort of psychological control, but it was also a control that he fined people. So it was pecuniary, that people stopped doing things because they couldn't afford to pay the fines, which is very similar to what's been happening in Australia. So he really wanted to create a certain society, and arguably you could say that Andrews is doing the same thing. He He doesn't like small business. He doesn't like individuality. He doesn't like people being in control of their own destiny. He's a union man. He's a socialist. He doesn't like the idea of people disobeying his rules. Calvin hated people disobeying him. He hated being undermined. He was always right. There are so many similarities between Calvin and Andrews that I think perhaps Andrews is I don't believe in reincarnation, but if I did, I would say that Calvin's come back as Andrews in the 21st century.
Well, this is what's putting people off the Labor Party these days, right? Because it used to be the party of protecting civil liberties to a certain extent and standing up for human rights. And it's now really become a very, very authoritarian, controlling my way or the highway, disciplinarian, high fining, very quick to use the police and turn it on the people in the name of the public good or the greater good. In quite a scary way, and throwing those fines around. I remember when the lockdown started, or even just when the pandemic started back in, I think it was March 2020, when he first introduced fines in the order of, I think it was around $1,600, thinking, whoa, that's a thump for the working class, for the average Australian family, perhaps, or people who are struggling. Not exactly Labor's normal constituency, to be throwing fines at people of $1,600. It's very extreme. Now, a thing people don't understand about Andrews, I don't think, Bella, is that he did come out of the far left, very socialist, I think the most left faction, didn't he, of the Labor Party in Victoria?
Most left, and has never had a job. So he's a career politician, the worst of the worst. Doesn't understand what it is to run a small business, doesn't understand that you can't just turn it off and turn it on with a tap. He's sorry, I've lost my train of thought now.
That's all right. No, look, I mean, he is a very unusual character. And I think this is one of the things that people on the left don't understand about free market economics, is that when you're a boss in the corporate world, or you're a boss in a business, you are accountable all the time to your customers, and you are constantly being critiqued about your behavior and your manner and the way that you're operating, so that the business doesn't, suffer under your leadership. So a lot of effort and training goes into that over the years. And I think these career politicians really, really lack that. They kind of live in a bit of a bubble of, a very simplistic kind of, well, I'm the boss, I'm the authority. Are we seeing too much of that in Australia at the moment with our politicians in general, that they've forgotten what a liberal democracy is supposed to look like, that they're supposed to have a mindset of service and keeping government small, rather than a mindset of, leadership, ruling and being authoritative?
Oh, look, I mean, I can't. There are a few, obviously, who are genuinely in the job because they love Australia and they understand that they've been voted there and they serve us. I would say that you'd be hard pressed to find anyone in the current Victorian Labor government who has remembered that. That the way that Andrews has addressed the Victorians and the way he's treated the Victorians in the last 2 years reveals that. He even said that he believed he'd been sent to cure. He'd been sent by a higher power, presumably, to fix COVID, to get Victoria through this period of this pandemic. So he's got. He's a megalomaniac as well. So yes. But back to your point about the Labour Party, I just wanted to say that they are exactly what you would expect. We used to call them champagne socialists. That they are absolute class traitors. So it's a terrible combination of Andrews being a champagne socialist, a class traitor, completely forgotten that he was voted in and that he serves the voters, not the other way around. But he's been punishing the voters, and he punishes the voters who don't obey him. I mean, this is a character that I can barely believe we're talking about is walking around in 21st century Australia. This is where this pandemic bill is so shocking, because it is a totally foreign idea. It has nothing to do with the and it also brings into question, well, what have we fought for? We've been talking about how, and at the IPA we talk a lot about how Australia is a successful democracy and it's the reason why people want to come here. Would you look at Victoria if you're overseas now and say, I want to move to Victoria with this kind of bill? If you were reading about what this bill might entail, would you want to come to Australia? Is it the end of history in terms of, not in the Fukuyama sense, but is it the end of history in the Australian sense? Is it the end of democracy? I mean, this bill is the end of democracy in Victoria, at least.
I think the closest that we've come to this kind of leader in Australia before was probably Sir Joe Belcher-Peterson in Queensland. I grew up in the 80s in Brisbane. I was a young cadet reporter, and I remember going to press conferences with Joe, but I don't remember Joe being angry if we didn't, if you asked him the wrong question, or snapping or rude. He would smile and say, "Oh, well, don't you worry about that, carry on." And he had his little phrases, but he was always very positive about the state and the growth of the state and job creation and everything. He was just a classic sort of, typical free market liberal right winger in a sense, a little bit of an agri-socialist, like he liked to.
There's a little bit of authoritarianism in there, I think.
Definitely a lot of authoritarianism, and he didn't mind having a special branch of the police force to keep the protesters at bay. So I see him as sort of a measuring stick, a yardstick, if you like, of what's not good. But to compare that to the way Andrews behaves in news conferences and how passive the journalists are. Joe, was known for perhaps, I think he threw Quinton Dempster out a few times of news conferences and banned him from news conferences. But he got he got coverage for that. He got condemned for that. We don't see that same vibe going on, perhaps because now it's on the left side of politics. You're not seeing The Age or the ABC freaking out about this quite the way that they did in the 1980s with Sir Joe.
Yes, look, if it was a Liberal politician behaving this way, can you imagine what would be on the front page of The Age? Can you imagine the questioning that he'd be getting? Imagine what would be going around on Twitter. But instead, there's a sort of a tacit acceptance that what Andrews does is good for the state, and I do wonder if there will be a point where they realise that it's not, or will it be too late? This is the constant disappointment, isn't it, with the population at large, that people don't seem to realise what they're facing. But I mean, I think it's probably the same. It's the same throughout history. We're living in very interesting times, and I've always thought that this would last. Our stability and our peace and our prosperity would last. And of course, that is the big mistake that we've made. And I think Australians are having to really re-examine what it is to be Australian, and really think about our freedoms, and people are probably asking, are they worth fighting for? I think the Victorians have been so crushed that you just do whatever you want, just let me alone, So it's a really existentialist time that we're living through, I think, and Andrews has really highlighted the weakness of our democracy as well, unfortunately.
So on that note, Bella, what do we need? What does history teach us about what we need to enhance? What do we need to make sure that we put in place it's okay while you've got benevolent government and you've got good people there not exploiting laws like this, but when you have laws like this in place and then you get a bad leader, or you get them put in by a bad leader who wants to exploit them for control and power reasons, what do? How does a society get itself out of that, particularly when the people think that majority of people think that this is good because we're being kept safe?
Yes. That's a really difficult question. We haven't had this pandemic.
Now, could you just solve all the problems of civilization throughout the ages?
I wish I could. My job title indicates that it might be that I should be able to, but I'm obviously losing control of Western civilizations. I'm failing massively at my job. I thought we had those. Those in place. That's why we have rule of law. That's why the Westminster system has been so good. I thought, like many people, that we didn't have anything to worry about. So how do we scramble and how do we get out of this? This is a question that I honestly can't answer. I think it goes back to, I think career politicians is a big problem. But then how do you prevent that? How do you encourage working people, real people who've had experience of life and small business? How do you encourage them back into Parliament? Why would you go into politics at the moment with people like Andrews at the helm? So,
or journalists that are out to actually destroy your character and
yes,
and then the legal risk.
Exactly. So how do we change that? How do we get good people back into government? I think that's the question, and I don't have the answer to that.
No, and that's a big question in both. That's a big problem in both the major parties, really, isn't it? Now we're seeing the failure of the young liberal culture, I guess, rising through the Liberal Party, and we have a similar problem with Labor and the transition into unions and then into the party, and It just and then we have a choice between, well, in some cases, to be unkind about it, you might say dumb and dumber, right?
Yes,
a minor party's the answer, Bella.
Minor party. Well, the Lib Dems are. I mean, look at David Limbrick in Victoria, who's a hero, and Quilty. The Victorian Liberal Party has been terrible. They've allowed this to happen, but it's taken the minor parties to stand up and actually stand up against Andrews. So perhaps this is the way. Perhaps this is the end of the two-party. Perhaps this is the death knell for the two-party system.
Well, putting Tim Smith's poor judgment and impeccable timing aside,
yes.
Why do you think that we're not seeing? A lot of people have said, look, we haven't seen strong enough opposition coming from the Liberals. I know in the Queensland and Western Australian elections, the party strategy was to kind of play it safe. And, these premiers are getting a lot of praise for keeping everybody safe. And people just like to hear, shut the borders, shut the borders. Why do you think the Liberal Party's not being more assertive and taking a stronger stance? Because it hasn't worked for them to play it safe.
No, it hasn't, and they're continuing to play it safe. So you think they would have changed tack by now. But at the beginning, I remember thinking, where's the opposition on this? Why? But the opposition was actually backing the lockdowns. I remember receiving email correspondences from various Liberal Party members. I was on their mailing lists, and they were saying, the Labour government is where this is the lockdown and these are rules. And I was thinking, well, you shouldn't be telling me what the rules are. You should be telling me why this is unnecessary and why we're fighting against it and why. But they haven't, and I don't know. Are they terrified of Daniel Andrews? He's got a strong stranglehold. Is it cult of personality? Are they as terrified of him as his own party members are? I mean, these are questions. I'm sorry, I'm not answering your questions very well because I don't.
No,
I can only speculate.
Yeah. If you look at the high-profile Liberals who've left the party and gone into the Liberal Democrats, you've got people like Campbell Newman, obviously, in Queensland, John Ruddock in New South Wales, and others are emerging, Ross Cameron.
Yes.
So these guys have looked at it and said, well, hang on a minute. And I know Campbell Newman has on this show said that, when he wants to get to Canberra and be in the Senate to hold their feet to the fire. It's the old keep the bastards honest of the Don Chipp, the original Australian Democrats era, although this party is a little bit more right-wing, obviously. But the Liberal Democrats want to see somebody playing this opposition role because they believe that the Liberal Party has failed to be the opposition, yet we seem to see the Liberal Party continuing with this failed strategy they applied in Western Australia and Queensland. Sorry to get into sort of current politics, but have I missed something? Is there some strategy that's going on there that they think it will definitely work for them early next year when we have the federal election that's causing all of this shift towards or away from the quiet Australians' views that got them over the line in 2019?
Well, my question is on this. Where is ScoMo in this? He's silent on what Andrews is trying to do in Victoria at the moment. And I know he's not. He has little power over what the premiers do, but he should have been saying, he should have stood up the morning that this bill came out and said, I will not allow this to happen in democracy. And so if that's the leadership, what chance does the rest of the party have? This isn't leadership. He's not saying anything. It's unbelievable that the way that this Prime Minister has let this country go to complete ruin in the last 2 years and become the laughing stock of the world. But yet he's flying over to Glasgow to talk about a problem that's not even real. And it's just
it's not a problem we can do much about.
It's not a problem we can do. Yeah. We can do anything about, and even if we did, it makes no difference. I don't want to get into climate change, but surely he should be. If anything, no more funding to Victoria, no more federal funding to Victoria until Andrews gets back on. Until Andrews.
It's this question of we talk about we don't want them to be authoritarian. We don't want them to be too. Strong in telling us what to do or how we should live. But then when something happens where they should be stepping in and saying, hang on, I'm a leader here, I'll be a leader, we don't have the power. Well, okay, maybe you don't have the constitutional power, but you have a heck of a lot of moral authority and ethical authority bestowed into you, right?
Exactly. Even the Prime Minister saying something would give people more confidence and know that they're not completely alone and have absolutely no recourse to anyone in this period. And but Scott Morrison has never defended free speech. He's very silent and weak on everything, really. What's he said of any consequence in the last 2 years? That I can't think of anything apart from he gave one small speech on identity politics to a small group of people. But apart from
he
that,
definitely plays it safe. He definitely plays it safe.
And this is what happens when you play it safe. So
So coming back to Kelvin. What happened in the end? I mean, how did the people get themselves out of that situation?
Well, they didn't. They just got used to it. But in the end, Carbon died, and politics sort of stepped in, and the consistency. Sorry, I have trouble saying that word, which is difficult.
Constituency.
It sort of disbanded, and obviously Geneva's not a police state anymore. But it was actually really hard to when I was looking into the history of it, it was actually really hard to find out what happened after that period and how did people get back to normal. And I think, all the Catholics left. So everyone who was still there was sort of in favor of it. They liked this Puritanism. They got used to it, just as the Victorians and Australians in a way have got used to these insane rules that they've imposed on us for the last 2 years. The mask rule inside, and putting a mask on to go to a table and then taking a mask off again, 3 steps. It's just, I was told the other day, I was outside a bar and I was told to put my mask on outside to go to an outside bar. People are doing it. They just get used to it.
Yeah. Well, it's the willingness that people have to adapt when they know that there's a fear threat there.
Yes.
And the fear is hyped up, obviously beyond all proportion. We know that.
Yeah.
But the vaccination situation is similar, right? Because it's like, well, there's no strong collective case scientifically for anybody else to need to be vaccinated to keep me safe when I'm fully vaccinated. So why are we imposing these mandates and doing this coercion? What are we trying to create here? We're just going to divide the society. There'll be 20% of people who don't want to get vaccinated. That's okay. We'll still get to 80%.
Yeah.
What difference is it going to make? Very little, I think.
Yeah, this segregation is terrible. And also, vaccinated people can pass on coronavirus.
That's right.
To other people.
There's no collective.
So why do we need? Yeah. So why do? It's not as if I'm once I'm vaccinated, if you're non-vaccinated, it's just more dangerous than I am. It's.
No, I mean the counter argument to that I've heard from people who are sort of in favour of the mandates is that, well, it may not be. You might still be a little bit infectious, but you are less infectious slightly. Now, I've looked at UK data that says that that's not the case. I've had people throw me stuff that says that it is the case. But in any case, when you're dealing with, a society saying, well, we're going to impose this very strong restriction, you have to be pretty darn sure there's a strong, not just a moderate collective benefit. You have to be sure that if we're going to take away individual rights, that there really is a very big collective benefit. And I haven't seen a big collective benefit there, not just with vaccination, but even with lockdowns. I mean, the equation just hasn't been there to warrant the extent to which these premiers are exerting these quite extraordinary restrictions.
Oh, the lockdowns are a complete failure. I mean,
and the border closures.
Oh, just the whole thing's just been. Let's just never have this again.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm more interested in doing, is putting laws in place that.
Yes.
Is the IPA, has the IPA got a view on that, or have you been working on any of that to sort of? Do you know? Is there something?
Well, the IPA was one of the first voices last year to say end the lockdowns. I think in the first or second lockdown, and we've been consistently saying that for the last 2 years. But everyone's just emerging from this now in a bit. I think everyone's quite shell-shocked. So we're going to have to sit down and really work out how do we prevent this from happening again. And it's very difficult if you've got someone like Scott Morrison, who never actually criticised any of the premiers really for locking us up in our homes. And not only that, he actually said lockdowns only work when lockdowns end. Or what was it he said? He said he made some comment about some
It was quite absurd, almost as
it was quite
absurd as some of the comments we've heard about, we will only know if the vaccine against the children works.
Yeah, we'll work if we try it out on some children. Yeah, that's right.
Oops. Wow. Yeah, that worked with polio, that strategy. Yes. Anyway, Bella, look, thanks so much for so much of your time. It's been great to chat. Love to have you back on the show sometime again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll find someone else like Calvin to have a go at.
Absolutely. Yeah. Terrific. And I want to know more about the Western Civilizations program. So maybe next time come on and tell us about that. But people can.
Yes, I'd love to.
They can get to it through the IPA website, right?
Yes, they can. They can look at all the research that we do and op-eds and commentary.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much, Bella De Brera from the Institute of Public Affairs.
Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Damian Coory. If you enjoyed this episode of The Other Side, please like, subscribe, click every button and bell you possibly can on whatever platform you're on, and please tell your friends. That's the #1 way you can help us grow. If you'd like to join our VIP WhatsApp group and never miss an episode, because we'll send you a link as soon as they come out, just send us an email first on theothersideost@gmail.com. asking to opt in, and we'll add you to our VIP group. We'll send you a link so you can add yourself. It's a one-way group, not a chat group, so you won't be bombarded with messages or anything like that. And if you'd like to join the Discernible crew and get all the content from our platform, you can do that at discernable.io. discernable.io.